um, all the goodies on it. You name it, and I got it.
It's called crack cocaine. Once you have it, you can't live without it. Hey, I'm sorry. I'll tell you. Say hi to Esther. Hi, Lily. How are you?
Hi, Jeff. Mazel tov to you.
Thank you.
Your-
Thank you.
your grandson
Lily,
is a-
thank you for sending me that information.
You're very welcome.
And also, I appreciate the videos. I do appreciate them.
Well, I would like an honest conversation about them.
Yeah, I need to sort of sit down. I mean, I just skimmed through it, but sit down and go through them thoroughly. And then, yeah, we can have a serious conversation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, is it 7 yet?
Yes.
And Lily was, I just recently, for the first time, became a grandfather.
Congratulations.
Oh,
I
my
have a
goodness.
3-week-old who's living with us. And,
Wonderful.
yeah, we're not totally politically correct yet. We're getting there.
A boy or a girl?
Girl.
What's her name?
Bea. B-A-E-A-H. Pronounced like B-A-Y-A-H. But yeah, she's a honey. So we have my daughter and my son-in-law living with us, and
Well, mazel tov.
thank you.
And I'm jealous. My grandkids live on the other side of the country, and I'm not even going to see them this year.
Yeah, ditto. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of them had a baby girl this past fall in October. And
Oh.
I was planning to go out there, and then this.
The kid, she was born at Brigham and Women's, and the kids were anxious, but they said that Brigham and Women's handled it, really did it well. But
Oh, that's great. That's
Yeah.
good to hear, actually.
but whether you have COVID or not, they're up every 3 hours feeding.
That is for sure.
Are you also up every 3 hours?
No. The grandfather
You got the
has to be-
grandparent luxury.
Exactly. Anyway, hi everybody. I miss seeing everyone.
Yes. But I
Right.
see we're all here. Which
I'm
is
not sure how I'm
amazing.
gonna. Yeah.
Perhaps one of the benefits of Zoom is we can all make the meetings. We've got nothing better to do. Okay.
Did someone very official just show up on the screen? A very official person?
Yeah, you saw a picture of GB in a suit, but it was a photo.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay, so let's begin the meeting. We are recording this on Zoom. And Lily, do you want another recording?
No, as long as it's recorded, I'm fine.
Excuse me?
No, as long, oops, am I muted? No, as long as it's recorded. I'm gonna record it.
Okay. You are sometimes asked for permission to record. So
No, if it's being recorded, I'm not
yes,
going.
the videotape is available on the town website. The video of our last 2 meetings is available, including all the introductions that we just did
Oh,
and
no.
asking about everybody's grandkids because we shouldn't edit them. So, has everyone received the minutes of the last meeting? And do we have any comments on it? Can I have a motion then?
I move to accept the minutes.
Is there a second? No
Oh,
one wants.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Thank you. Thanks, Chuck.
We don't need a roll call.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, for minutes, no, we'll note it was unanimous. So the agenda is pretty much what we have been doing until now. Let's talk, let's skip down to the things that that have an active conversation. Suzanne and Carol have been busy and made some progress. Why don't we start off with that? Where we are on the applications for grants and so on.
Okay, so, well, most recently, the Green Communities grant that was seeking energy efficient equipment for various municipal buildings had a deadline of May 1st, and that was submitted. And the DOER, Department of Energy Resources, DOER, I guess it's called, they've acknowledged and confirmed receipt, and they're back asking for further details, and which Rise Engineering is taking care of answering. And everything looks good so far. One thing that might get pushed off of this project is the water heating unit for the COA, because I wasn't sure about the details, but the cost and I guess the payback in years, whatever, means that the town would have to contribute a certain amount of money in order for it to go through. And that's not going to happen. So have I frozen?
Yes.
Yeah. How did you miss everything?
We
No, we
heard
heard
what you had
you.
to say.
The
Okay.
screen froze.
Okay. So you heard that the water heating system might get tossed off of this project.
Right.
Yes.
So,
We
But-
heard the audio, just not the video, just the video froze.
Okay, good. Okay, so that's that. So we're waiting to hear back from whether they're going to accept that application or not. Then next is the MVP grant that we're partnering with Cape Cod Commission with for addressing, well, we want an assessment done by an engineering professional for low-lying vulnerable roads that can be impacted by sea level rise and storm surges. And the deadline for that is June 11th, so it's coming up. And that's moving ahead. I had some mistaken information and I straightened it out with Heather today. So what's happening is that the MVP application,
Now your sound froze. Now your sound froze. Could you?
okay, can you hear me?
Yes, now. Well,
Okay.
it came in and out.
Okay, so so the MVP grant money would cover most of that, and the EDA, that big grant fund that was recently given to the CCC, will be the match for that to make up for the money. So the town will not have to come up with any matching funds for that if all goes well with that. So in the meantime, I submitted a letter of support to our committee for everybody to approve, and have also requested that the COA, the Wellfleet Conservation Trust, and Friends of Herring River, and I'm probably missing someone. All right, let's see. Blah, 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 blah. But anyway, they are going to, Wellfleet Audubon, the Wellfleet Harbor Sanctuary. They are all agreeing to also contribute letters of support towards that project. So that's the latest on that.
So can you explain again, the MVP grant covers the match that we need for the,
That's what I originally had thought.
oh,
I thought they were going to cover the match, but it's vice versa, that we're applying to them, which was the original plan,
yeah.
was to apply to them for the grant and then use some of the EDA grant money that the Cape Cod Commission was awarded, would cover the match on that. So that's how that's going.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And what is the risk or likelihood of not getting you the grant? What are
Um,
our chances?
they're probably very good because several towns, this is a regional grant. It's not just
Mhm.
Wellfleet, and it's not just Wellfleet and Truro. It's several towns. I believe Brewster might be on this, possibly Sandwich. I can find out from Heather exactly who agreed to it. I know that she was reaching out to various towns, but it's the region. So I think there's a good chance. She thinks there's a good chance that it'll come through, especially if we have that match.
Mhm.
That really helps out. It's already secured, so.
Good.
And then let's
So
see.
to further this along, you need a letter of support from the committee. And
Right.
so I would entertain a motion that the committee um, generate the letter that Suzanne has distributed, and we'll send it out. Do we have a motion for that?
So moved.
Okay, Lily? And anyone second?
I'll second that.
Who's
Okay,
that? Who seconded it?
Robert.
Robert,
Okay.
Okay, all in favor by a show of hands. Okay, any opposed? Okay, since we can see everybody on the committee, we know it's unanimous.
So just a note with that, it goes directly to Hillary Lemos because she is the point person for that project.
Okay, so now you have forwarded me the latest email, right? The letter, the one I
Right.
distributed. And that's the
Yeah.
letter you would like sent to Hillary.
Yes, she's going to turn it in.
Okay, do they need a signature on it or is just an email enough? Well, I mean, do I have to sign it and then copy it and send the PDF? You don't know. What do you? Oh,
Okay,
well.
I missed all of that.
Do I need to sign it and then copy it and fax a PDF? Or is the email enough with a statement that this was approved by the committee?
With the I think a PDF with the
Okay.
actual signature would be best.
Okay,
Yeah.
fine.
Because it's going to be submitted to them. Yeah, they want it
Okay.
on record.
Do we
Yeah.
know how much the grant would be for, or how much Wellfleet would get?
We're asking, okay, so, well, that's a good question because it originally was for $141,000, but, okay, without the heating system and off the top of my head, I'm gonna say $9,000, something like that. Um, Maybe, I have to really go back and check, but something along those lines, so it'll be less that amount.
But that's the Green Communities grant.
Yeah, right?
What
Is that
about the other two grants?
Oh, okay. So for the MVP, I did ask Heather for that information today. Because it's going to be a combination of many towns. So she'll get back to me on that once they have that information. I do recall though, and this was just simply a guesstimate at the time, to hire an engineering consultant to do assessment of Wellfleet was going to range between 70,000 and 110,000, something like that. That was a
Mhm.
guess. So,
Okay,
yeah,
but what we're getting is a consultant to do a plan for us.
right. Make recommendations of what needs to be done.
Mhm. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a little bit more. Is David here tonight?
Can I ask a question before
Sure.
you go on? I am curious about the hot water heater. I and Dick both have these hot water heaters, the heat pump hot water heaters, and it's amazing how little energy is used. I'm surprised that the payback period would be such a long period of time, and it seems like such a little bit of money. I'm surprised about that. Do you have the documentation from Rise Engineering about that?
I do, and I'll forward that I'll forward it to everyone. I'll send it out. Yeah, because I haven't had a chance to look at that yet. It just came.
Yeah,
in the last couple of days.
Dick, I think the payback period was somewhere between 3 and 5 years when they put it into a house of, of course it's residential, so it's a different dynamic, but it was a very fast payback period.
So I'm not sure that it was the payback for the reason why they wanted, I'll send the documents to make sure, but whatever the issue was, it was going to require most likely that the town was going to have to put some money towards that.
Yeah, but that's a very little amount of money. I mean, if we're talking about $9,000, it would be interesting to just
You think the
verify
town
that.
might, you think
I
the
mean,
town
it's a
might-
very little amount of money, and if the payback is as quick as it is in a residential situation, I mean, it might be worthwhile to actually put in a few $1,000s. I don't
Okay,
know.
does everybody agree with that? Because we need to, I would love for everybody to take a look at this and come to that kind of conclusion, because I'm going to have to get in touch with Margaret Song really fast before she reaches out.
Well, I guess if we're curious, let's get that report and see why they think it takes so long. Because it's
Okay,
a 20-year. So I agree. On the household one, it was less. I know the COA has wiring issues. And maybe there's a lot of electrical work that has to go in.
Mm.
That confuses it.
I wonder how much hot water they actually use at the COA. You don't have people taking showers or baths. There's no laundry machines. Other than in the kitchen, it may be that it's a lot, I'm just guessing, but it could be that it's really long because they just don't use very much hot water.
Well, let's take a look at the paperwork and we'll
Yeah.
see, right?
yeah.
But thanks for bringing that up, and we'll look. There was something else you wanted to ask David about?
Oh, okay. So is David here tonight?
Yes.
Right. So the next, hi, David. The next point was about the CZM and Hillary's response to any potential projects that we might want to do complementary to what she's doing. And that is all up in the air, and it kind of looks like the answer is no, but what do you think?
Well, I think it's probably no, but it is up in the air is the best answer.
Could you tell us what the topic we're discussing is before?
Yes. Let me back up a little bit. Carolyn, Suzanne, and I had a long and very productive phone call a week or two ago with Heather McElroy of the Cape Cod Commission. And we went over all sorts of things, which I want to relay to you, but it's not an actual agenda item, but one of them had to do with this. And what I recall, Carol and Suzanne, is that Heather was going to call Hillary to check in on what she actually was applying for in more detail and get back to us. Now, I haven't talked to her since then or heard back from her. Have you?
No, Carol had the latest communication from her. And I think she forwarded that to all of us, to the three of us at least.
The latest communication with Heather?
Wait, Heather, sorry, I missed a lot of your, what you were saying. I froze out. Hillary or Heather?
Heather was going to call Hillary and get more
Right.
detail about that proposal and then get back to us.
Right. That's never, yeah, that's where it stopped.
So that's up in the air because the information from Hillary was very truncated and brief. And Heather volunteered to call her thinking that she would maybe be able to have a little more of a productive conversation with Hillary. So we three of us said, sure, that'd be great. And then we haven't heard back from Heather. I will follow up with her. I'll send her a note.
So what is the proposal?
I'll have to look.
Just in general outlines, what are we asking for? Not the details. I want to know which ballpark we're in.
Do you have that, Carol or Suzanne? I'm looking. There was just a brief email from Hillary.
They are applying for round 2 of their coastal resiliency grant that includes the 4 Outer Cape towns. And Heather talked about including as a new thing, low-lying roads in that project.
Okay.
And we were coming up with possible additional things that we could add to her grant, not really knowing what was in her grant.
Right. And I thought that Hillary said that other people were working on the low-lying road issue. I'm not finding that note from her, but it was something to that effect.
Other people on her grant,
Unnamed people, other people.
may have been the people in the other towns.
I don't know. But listen, what we should do so as to not take up everybody's time is, why don't we get, I'll circle back to Heather. I'll find out what she found out from Hillary and where that whole thing stands and what actually is being applied for. I know that Hillary had said something about some road work, but we don't have enough information right now. And I think it was going to change maybe based on Heather's conversation with Hillary.
Okay, there's one other person we should get in touch with, and that's the DPW. Because
Right.
anything involving roads, they probably know about.
Yeah.
So either the head or the assistant director, Jay. But could you give them a phone call, David, and see if they know anything about it? Because it would be embarrassing if the other people were our own DPW and they're doing something entirely different.
Yeah, I will do that, sure. The other thing I'll do, I think separately, or I can do it under new business at the end, is I typed up my notes from that phone call we had with Heather. And as I said, we covered a lot of ground unrelated to grants. And so it doesn't really fit neatly into any given topic. I can either talk about it under new business or send my notes on to the whole committee, either way.
Why don't you talk about it under new business
Okay.
when we get there, okay?
So I have one more grant-related item. Okay, this is the final one. There's another cycle of the MVP grant application in the fall. They have a spring one and a fall one. And so one thing that we had in our sights to do in the fall was complementary to the low-lying roads vulnerability was at-risk population vulnerability
Yes.
and building vulnerabilities. And so the same idea of bringing in a professional consultant to assess that and make recommendations. I reached out to Heather McElroy at Cape Cod Commission today to ask for her feedback on whether she thought this was a good time to pursue that, given that we're going after this low-lying roads MVP thing now. And if it was, feasible to do that, would CCC be willing to partner with us? And she expressed interest. She thinks it makes sense to go ahead with that. It's a different grant and it doesn't interfere, and it certainly dovetails very nicely with the low-lying roads. And she's going to see what their agenda looks like in the fall. And if it's open, they do want to partner with us on that. So that's it for grants.
Okay. Well, you're very busy. Thank you.
Yeah.
All of you.
Thank you,
Okay.
the whole committee. You've done a good job.
Yes. So I guess nothing much has happened. I did some research on the status of the state legislation on next topic. And I guess it passed the Senate 36-3 and went to the House Ways and Means Committee on February 10th, just before everything stopped. So I think that's the last thing that happened, is probably nobody has done anything. This is Senate 2477, which set the goal of 0 emissions by 2050, 50% below the 1990 levels by 2030, 75% below the 1990 levels by 2040, and then net zero by 2050. So that's a very ambitious goal. It's, it's like sort of like the petition that's coming up before town meeting, which is kind of general and do the best you can as soon as possible. I prefer hard limits, like, a timeline, because it makes you work towards something. You know whether you're getting there or not. That said, I don't know if it's going to pass this year. I think it'll pass eventually, but I don't know if this year everyone's going to be focusing on COVID-19. Does anyone else have any feelings about that? Or John, were you part of the original petition that was going before town meeting? You're muted. I'll unmute you.
Yes, I was.
So have you heard anything about that? Is it still on the warrant?
I believe it's still on the warrant. I'll need to actually call in to the town and make sure.
Mm-hmm.
We sent in the signatures, and I didn't hear back of any problem with the signatures. Assume it went on, but I will check. I mean, I let a lot of things slip with the COVID stuff, and the town meeting being put off, but I'll check on that.
Right. We said at one point in this committee that the bylaw committee didn't like the petition because they said it should be a policy set by the Board of Selectmen.
Right.
So I sent the Board of Selectmen a note saying, if you think this is a policy you should set, can I get on the agenda to discuss it? And they didn't want to do anything. They're too tied up in COVID-19.
Right. I think that.
But I did ask.
I know. Good. I mean, I appreciate that, Dick. I think the issue was that we wanted to coordinate it with the same activity in all the towns.
Mm-hmm.
All the towns have this on their warrant to address this issue. And that's the reason for the commonality.
Mm-hmm. I understand. There's also something before the Cape Cod Commission on the 28th of May, something very similar. It's a citizen's petition to amend the regional policy plan.
Right.
To take account of these goals.
Right, and that I think is being pushed by also 350.org.
Right, I think they're the petitioners. Yes.
Right.
That's the 28th of May.
Dick, I don't think I think your instincts are right on. I can't imagine that this state and all of the towns aren't facing a huge financial crisis going forward. And I anticipate, I mean, nothing I've heard about the town, but just in general, I mean, we're looking at, yeah, I tend to agree. I think a lot of things are just going to get pushed aside or pushed back for a year, at least.
Jeff, on the other hand, the opportunity here is that right now our carbon emissions are down. And this seems to me the time that we should be acting aggressively so that when things start to open up, we have in place the kind of limits that we want so that we don't go back. In other words, we don't want to end up back where we were, 6 months ago and then fight to bring us to where we happen to be now because of the crisis. So I think it's a good time. You're right. It's going to be a very difficult time to do it because nobody wants to talk about anything but, how can we get business back? What's going to happen to the Cape? What's going to happen to the town's finances? At the same time, I think this is a time that we should not let the benefits that have occurred because of COVID-19 in terms of carbon emissions to just slip away as a momentary blip. That's my only comment. But I agree with you. It will be a difficult sell.
Lily?
Yeah, am I muted? No. That's why I sent those links. Well, I make things in the kitchen. I, cook and I watch Netflix and Amazon Prime. So I did send 2 links for 2 different, one movie and 1 miniseries that it talks about alternative energy in one way or another. And I think they're worth looking at and worth talking about. I don't know if they're responsible solutions in the series or not, but I think we should talk about it and talk about how do you verify that and how, if there's anything we want to do to bring it forward. And I do think it's worth, watching the movie. I think it has some good points to be made.
I think it's important for the town to make a commitment as to what can actually be achieved. That's another topic. And I don't have a lot of confidence in the definition of net zero. And I have a lot of questions about whether that's the right way to think about it. But I do think we have to make a commitment, and whether the resources become available to achieve that or not, we don't know now. We have no idea.
Well, we have a very practical and immediate decision because we're about to consider a bond for $150+ million, $100 and something million for a new regional high school, which is not going to be net zero, and which at an increase in cost that would effectively reduce the life cycle cost, it could be a LEED's net zero building. So the question is, and I don't feel the same sense of urgency I did earlier that if this building gets put off for a year, so what if they have to go back to the drawing boards and make it net zero? But if we're trying to commit to a 50% reduction to the 1990 levels in 10 years, that building is going to be a big way to contribute.
Right. Can I add something here, Dick, that when you've added the building thing, I was going to bring this up in new business, but I think now you've mentioned this another time to mention it. Wellfleet's got a affordable housing project that I'm strongly in favor of that's being proposed for the Lawrence Road.
Yeah.
And right now, what's in the proposal for the RFP is that it be solar ready.
No, we're beyond that, John. David and I worked with them, and we identified a huge source of funding, which if it is built to net zero and 50% low income, they get 75% of the money.
Right.
I believe they're working towards that. That's the current plan.
Okay, because I was going to, the one that went in Eastham just will never get solar the way it's structured.
Dave, do you want to talk a little more about that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think I haven't seen their most recent document, but I know that was the intention, and that we had, I believe, got them the folks doing the planning here connected with the Cape Cod Commission, with Cape Light Compact. And
Right.
they, as far as my understanding was, they were all very strongly in favor of making this a net zero development. But exactly where it stands today, I don't know.
But that was the last we left it, that it would be a net
Right.
zero project. It would have a large funding. The net zero brings enough funding with it,
Right,
but it also is a requirement that it be 50% or more low income.
Right,
right.
And they were on board with that too.
right.
So
In fact,
David
it'll
and
be
Mark,
more than 50% low income. I mean, that's what the criteria is. But in order
Yeah.
to maximize the grants and the subsidies they need, in practice, it'll be more than 50%.
well, okay, so
But that's not the point here.
yeah, but we did get in touch with them and
Good.
it was
good.
going to
I
be a
was
net
glad
zero
because
project.
the last I heard, they were talking about making it solar ready. That means basically no solar.
No, they did go beyond that. I'll follow up with Gary Sorkin about the exact status of this. How about?
That's okay. I'm on that.
Oh, okay,
meeting, and we have a meeting coming up, and I'll ask Gary about it.
great. That's even better. Okay.
So
Lily,
back to the high school. So we took that action step in the letter that went to the Board of Selectmen. That also included about the information about the high school. Short of that, I mean, I agree that it would make a lot of sense to explore this further. But we do serve at the pleasure of the Board of Selectmen, and they are understandably very busy with this COVID-19 situation. But I do agree that if there was some way to get a fuller picture of this, there may be some solutions to get to net zero, but I don't know how to do that at this point.
well, again, we did ask to talk to the select board about it. And they're busy now. We still have in our charter the ability to pursue these things. So I don't think we're going to stop talking about it or even making recommendations. My personal feeling is maybe it isn't a good time to build a new high school if they can't see their way clear to making it net zero, because they're going to have to do a major revision within 10, 20, 30 years at much more expense than if they paid for it now. So it might be a lousy investment to do it now.
And frankly, with the COVID-19 situation, we don't know. I mean, I know that there are fall college courses that, schools that are just not having classroom sessions. They've already made that decision for the fall semester. We don't know what's going to happen in the fall at this point. And maybe there will be a huge shift to online learning, and who knows how that might affect a high school. So maybe they don't want to build at this point, or maybe they want to at least reassess it.
I think prudent for them to wait a year. That'll probably happen. I think a lot of people get behind that. On the Lawrence Road, there was an article in the Cape Cod Times about, they're looking at this nitrix wastewater system. Right? It's a little outside of climate, but it's still real important to us. And so if they're looking at that, I got to believe they're also pretty supportive of the solar. But just stay in touch with them on that.
Yeah, solar's nice, but it's more important that they do a net zero building, not by using energy and making it up with solar, but by not using the energy in the first place.
Right.
But I think that part of these discussions were that we were looking for funding for solar panels too. We don't know if they'll be there or not, but yes, they will. It's part of the that Cape the electric initiative, which is a combination of solar and batteries, right? So I think I talked to Margaret about whether or not they could qualify for that. But maybe they'll
Gary
need it.
on, I think the meeting's on Thursday. I know it's coming up. I'll talk to Gary then.
Okay. But batteries as a supplement are a good idea because it's now reached the point where it's economical to do batteries along with solar, which solves the main drawback of solar that when the sun sets and it's a hot summer day, the demand for electricity goes up and there's no solar being generated. Okay, so the grant. Let's see, do we have anything else on this topic? Okay,
What
what
topic,
about
what topic is that, Dick?
the grant issue and the
Oh, okay,
housing?
okay.
And we covered the select board discussion, which is nothing's happening. Anything different on the global covenant of mayors? How we did any actions there? Or anything outstanding we need to
I
do?
have I've been laying out a plan to do the next stage of submissions, which is going to include several different things. One is a revised version of the greenhouse gases based on the latest information in respect to mass energy, insight, and so forth. And we'll, review each one of the areas to see whether there's significant changes. There are going to be some. The other part of this is going from the study on vulnerability to discussing the proposals that are now being worked on in respect to addressing vulnerability issues. And it's suitable to submit those plans to the Global Covenant. So there are two different areas here. One is it is required to submit an updated version of the greenhouse gases. And in respect to the whole vulnerability thing, having submitted the original study, and now we're concretely making specific proposals to deal with some of the issues, that should be described and submitted to the Global Covenant. So that's my general plan for this, and the submissions have to be completed by sometime in August this year, which gives us, I think, plenty of time to do a decent job.
I think Suzanne could correct me, but I don't think we have any concrete proposals. Our proposal is to hire someone to come up with some concrete plans.
That's a proposal.
Okay. Yeah,
That's a commitment
You're
the
muted,
town is
Suzanne.
making to do something by doing that.
right.
That's what they're looking for. They're looking for whatever you are doing to go further along that path.
Okay. Suzanne?
Oh, no, I was just saying, I was concurring with Robert. It's phase one, what we're doing now by hiring. That was it.
Mhm. Okay. So we will submit that when we know. What do you have any outlines on or any ideas about energy conservation going forward in terms of greenhouse gas reduction? About next actions, Robert. You said you were beginning to work on what to do next.
Are you asking me that question? I did.
Yes.
So the question of what specific plans are relative to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, I don't know whether anything that has been discussed, legitimately fits into that. Now, the question about the school could be an example, but I think we're very far away from,
Mhm.
saying that there's a proposal there that is addressing that issue. So I don't know whether we have any plans that can be described now in respect to reducing greenhouse gases.
Okay.
There
GB,
could be things addressed by, changing the mix of cars that the town owns. But I don't see, I mean, I don't think that's going to happen. There are other examples like that. I was not anticipating finding specific proposals for how to proceed with reduction.
okay.
It'd be great if we had some.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm
we
a
can
little
agree on
pessimistic about how far we're going to get in respect. If you compare the 2018 with 2019, there's very, minor changes. Some things have increased a lot. There's a lot of greenhouse gases associated with in the town-owned buildings with the use of oil. There were some things which were improvements, but anyway, I don't think I've seen any proposals that are specifically oriented around this issue.
Okay. And both you and GB have access to the Mass Energy Insight now? And are you both?
I've been looking at the results for 2019 in that database, and you'll see there's a very, very minor difference between 2018 and 2019.
So we seem to have plateaued. Not surprising.
We addressed a bunch of things that were easy to deal with, but building heat and car and gas use are not things that that much has happened with. And in respect to that's town-owned properties, and if you look at the other properties, we're still not in a situation where we have any really accurate estimates for things like town residents' use of propane and fuel oil.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to get a real handle on that, a change has to be made that requires the companies that are providing those fuels to report them.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise,
Okay.
we're just working with, in this climate for a typical house, how much does it use, which is totally unsatisfactory way of knowing how much is being used, how much propane and how much fuel oil.
Okay. All right. I have a few ideas, but it isn't the town thing. It's got to be at state level, I think. Because they can pass laws to require reporting.
That's true.
All right. The PV, no change from last month. Nothing has happened. It's still hung up in the court, which hasn't reoccupied the court building in a month and a half.
Yeah, I did try to follow up, and I emailed, made a couple of calls, and I emailed to Dan, and Dan said nothing's happening. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but I did learn that Land Court is meeting in Boston. It is open and it is meeting. I don't
They're
think.
holding hearings. That's not the same thing as stamping paperwork, which has to be done
Well,
locally.
the paperwork, it can be stamped. That's the thing I did find out, is it actually can be stamped and it can be registered once Land Court says it's okay. So it can actually happen here. So I'm not quite sure, if it can't be happening in the near future or not.
Okay. GB, have you had any further conversations about consolidating the bills?
So here's what's happened since the last meeting. On April 29th, I sent an email to the people that I had been in contact with: Gene Ferrari, the town accountant; Jane Tesson, the assistant town accountant; Jean Layden-Frost, the DPW administrative assistant; and Jean McLaughlin, the principal clerk. And what I did in that email on April 29th is I included a draft copy of the Eversource statement billing agreement. And that draft had a list of the 18 accounts that I believe are the ones that should be included in the statement bill. And in that email, I asked 5 questions. One was whether somebody could provide the service address for one of the accounts. There's a streetlight account that I don't have an address for, but I need it for the form. Then I asked them if they could verify the accuracy of all accounts listed on the form. Did they know of any other town non-enterprise accounts that should be added to the list? And then the form has some additional information that you had to put on there, part of it which is where should the statement bill get sent to. So I asked for a feedback on that. And then it also has to be signed by somebody. And I asked for a recommendation as to who should sign the application. So I waited until a week and a day later on May 7th, and having received no response, I sent out a tickler to those 4 people. And later that day, May 7th, I got a reply back from Mark Vincent, who's the head of DPW, who says, "We have a ton of things going on right now, so we still need some time to consider the Eversource bills. We should let you know within a couple of weeks." So couple of weeks will be the Thursday, the 21st. And if I haven't heard anything by then on Friday, the 22nd, I'll send them another email, see if I can get a reply.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you.
There's nothing particularly complicated about this. The form itself is very straightforward. And if there's a problem with account billing, you can always revert back on 30 days notice to the existing billing arrangement, which has been pointed out as well.
And remember, the overall goal is not just that we get a single statement bill, but that we be able to apply all the credits to that single account bill.
Right.
Which will mean we will avoid the nonsense of having to allocate output from the array to that.
Right. I had a discussion with Gene Ferrari before sending this email out, the original email out, and I explained to him that rather than wait until the beginning of the new fiscal year, July 1st, to do this, we the Energy Committee prefer to do it sooner than later, so that we have an account established that we can have the credits applied to, and he was fine with that. So now
because it's going to save him a ton of work.
Yeah.
Right.
Realize that all this headache is going to be his headache.
Yep. So I realize everybody is working from home and so forth, but uh,
Yeah.
it doesn't take much to work this thing through, but it is what it is.
Okay. All right. David, you had something you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I guess this would be new business.
Right.
I did find, by the way, going back to the grant that Hillary's working on, her reply, we had thrown out some ideas to Suzanne, Carol, and I to Hillary under two categories of the CZM grant RFP. One was projects, one was number 3, proactive planning, and the other was number 4, redesigns and retrofits. So we listed, just to kind of get a reaction, frankly, a couple of things for under redesigns and retrofits: gasoline tanks at the pier, recreation department buildings and facilities on Kendrick Avenue, low-lying fire hydrants, hardening low-lying power line poles, Wellfleet Harbor breakwater, retreat of beach parking lots, things like that. And what you wrote back with is, for the CZM grant, what they're addressing is proactive planning number 3. They're addressing, how they're addressing it, I don't know. They're addressing identification of hazardous areas and the issues facing each area. So that's, I believe, the centerpiece of that CZM grant. She did say that the reason they're not working on the direct issue of vulnerable town facilities is because, I'll just read you, I think there is ongoing work on these facilities and we would need more detail from the town on how they wish to proceed. I know Rec has worked on their building, Mike is working on the gas tanks. So that's where that's in. I don't know what Heather and Hillary talked about, and I will, like I said earlier, follow up with Heather about that.
Okay. Definitely the gas tanks are a big concern for the town.
Right.
And within a couple of years, something will need to be done about that.
Right. No, that's correct. Yeah. So
anyway,
I'll get back to you about what Heather says about that CZM grant, and I will contact DPW as well. But the broader thing, this conversation, I think Carol and Suzanne would agree, was very informative and useful. And at a minimum, I would propose that we stay in very close touch with Heather McElroy at the Cape Cod Commission, because she knows a lot, she knows what's going on, and we ought to have a regular connection going all the time. So if you'll bear with me, I'll go through, I'll try to do this quickly, 9 different topics we talked about. The first was an idea of a standing group composed of representatives from 4 Outer Cape towns and the National Seashore to focus exclusively on climate action. So a standing group of that with people from those places. It turns out that the Cape Cod Commission, some of you may know this, has been working on next steps in what they call stakeholder engagement, and that has included a focus on regional subgroups, as Heather put it. So this would be, in their parlance, a regional subgroup. So she said it's on hold at present due to the pandemic, but she did say she would take the idea back to her office for discussion and possible follow-up. Because I said, well, maybe we can at least get it organized, even if we can't do a whole lot right now. We can at least get it organized. It might be simpler for us on the Outer Cape than regional subgroups in other parts of the Cape. So that's another follow-up I'll have with her about that. We talked to them about the general idea of, to what extent can the Cape Cod Commission help with the movement from planning to action? Because, of course, their principal role is planning. So it was helpful to hear her respond. She said, it is mostly planning, but they can help, for example, prioritize roads to assess and the degree of hazard. They can help with funding and presenting change options to the public, which would have to precede any major action. So if we're going to move this or that or raise roads, they can help us or help the town present options at public meetings to explain and to generate public support. So that was helpful because they don't just plan, they also will help edge us towards some of the action things we want to do. Let's see, Route 6 raising. I learned more in a few minutes about transportation than I ever knew before. There is work underway and planning by the Cape Cod Commission through the Joint Transportation Council. And the way this works is there's a transportation improvement program. Transportation funds from the federal government go through the State Department of Transportation. And there's a specialist at Cape Cod Commission who Heather is going to connect me to learn more about that. So the combination of finding out what's going on around road planning from the commission and this guy, Steve Tapper, I think is his name, and talking to DPW will be a way to get a little more information about the road raising issue. Let's see, the next thing, there's a similarity and overlap between these two grants that Suzanne and Carol were talking about. There's the Coastal Resilience Grant Program and the MVP Grant Program. They are similar in overlap, but it turns out, and this is not an official part of their process, but Heather said that she has been told that the offices who evaluate the proposals, the two different proposals, talk to each other all the time. And they actually sometimes coordinate and link the two, which sounds really sensible, but not something you might expect. So there's not a big hard line between the two types of grants. And the idea is they sometimes say to people applying for grants, gee, why don't you pull this together and pull that together? And they can be very helpful, apparently. So that's a good inside tip on them being coordinated at the state level. We talked a little bit about bylaws and codes, focusing on climate ready issues and being more proactive. Some of this, you know, of course, the Conservation Commission's working on new bylaws for wetlands. And there's a whole lot going on. And what Heather said at one point, you know, this was even confusing for me to keep track of all these grants. And she created a spreadsheet, which she sent to us. So I have this little spreadsheet, I'll send it out to you, which describes a variety of grants. Let's see, maybe 9 or 10 different grants, some of which apply directly to Wellfleet, some of which apply to the region. So I'll send that out to you, and and that's another example of Heather is really working to keep track of all these things, and we really need to take advantage of that because it's her day job, you know, and it's not our day job. Let's see, we talked about energy and building efficiency. This is to do with Lawrence Road and indirectly, but the broader idea of a net zero stretch code, there's a big push going on around the state by advocates to amend the current stretch code and make it net zero. And that's got to be done at the state level. And she said that, you know, they could help us advocate for the new code. Again, this is what they do, provide education to the community to encourage adoption. So eventually, in my view, some kind of net zero stretch code will pass at the state level. Then, of course, it's up to the towns to decide to adopt it or not. What we can do is pave the way, prepare the ground, provide education, hold community meetings to talk about the net zero stretch code, because it's going to be a heavy lift. People already had trouble, and some people hate the stretch code as it is now. You talk to any builder and they go crazy when you say net zero stretch code. They think it's the worst thing in the world. So, but it can be done and it will happen eventually. But if we decide to take this on, we could really help when the state legislation does come through, who knows when, but we would then be an early adopter as a town for the new building codes. Lastly, there's a group which Lily, I know you know about, called the Barnstable County Coastal Management Committee, and Heather is the staff to that group. Heather McElroy. And there's also a subcommittee of the committee, of course, and that's called the Barnstable County Coastal Resources Subcommittee. And Hillary, our Hillary in Wellfleet, is on that subcommittee. And so that's I don't know a lot about it, but I think I have some information I just got. I'll send it on. I think that's possibly a place for coordination to happen on a wider scale than just individual towns. So sorry for covering all those disparate areas, but I will, I'll send you the list of current grants from Heather that are being worked on, and I'll send you my notes from the phone call. And my only thought about next steps is maybe, Dick, we could put on for an actual agenda item for the next meeting, a discussion of which, if any of these things, the committee might want to take on as a project. We can't do all of them. We might want to prioritize them. We might say we don't want to do that, whatever. But there's a number of sort of energy committee projects embedded in the stuff I just said.
Okay, we'll talk about it, but I'll try to make, what would you call the agenda item so that it'll jog your memory?
I would call it, right, good. I would call it collaboration with the Cape Cod Commission.
Okay.
That's good enough. I'll remember.
Dick, David,
Yeah.
I'm curious. The net zero issue is obviously going to come up if we get a buy for a year on the school.
Yeah.
Then we're going to need regional. I mean, it's a regional deal, big deal.
Yeah.
But as far as discussing net zero as to going to a state net zero, starting with high schools is just a natural combination.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, it's obvious to you too, but I'm just saying that if we aren't going to say yay or nay to the high school at our meeting, or whether Orleans is going to do it at the high school when they have their town meeting in the spring, it's definitely going to be a next step for the public education part. So if there's support from the Cape Cod Commission on that, it's such a regional issue that it seems a natural there.
Yeah, I think there will be. And by the way, the whole idea of a net zero stretch code, of course, is if the town adopted it and if it comes to pass, that would make it a requirement that new buildings and new construction would have to follow those codes. That doesn't stop Lawrence Road or an individual person or entity from building a net zero building today. You can still voluntarily decide to do that. The technology is there, the guidelines are there, the science is there. It's all been worked out quite thoroughly.
It's just that our efforts toward the high school is such a regional big deal.
Yeah.
That if we were going to step out of line and say, hey, we want to slow this down and keep the juggernaut from happening so we can go to net zero, we are out by our lonely. But if we do get the year to talk about it down the way, which is, I would say, is more than likely, with financial concerns going to be what they are, that's a way to play into their public education regional thing to support both ends of the net zero thing.
Well, yeah, so if we could get the commission to help us with that and be on our side.
Right.
Oh, it's huge because that's, now we're looking down the way, what, 50 years or 30 years. And I mean, that's what we're trying to do. But if we're just doing it philosophically, it really comes up when we talk about the high school right now,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
reinforces Dick's point. I think Dick's absolutely on top of that.
Good.
One aside, I was going through some of Heather's slides on, she did a presentation in Wellfleet about the progress and what's been happening on the Cape in terms of greenhouse. And she had a number of milestones on the graph, and I thought this was very funny. One was, I'm not quoting all of them, but one was the formation of the Cape Light Compact. One was some other group in Barnstable that had done something. But Outer Cape Energize came up as one of the milestones. I thought you'd be amused by that.
That is kind of amusing. It's not quite in the same league as Cape Light Compact.
Hey, you
Whatever.
take what you can get, right?
Yeah.
Local counts, you know?
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah,
Um,
good. No, that's good to hear.
yeah, yes, GB.
Just a question on the position of builders with regard to the net zero building codes and so forth. I know from experience, and David, you'll know what I'm talking about in regard to a builder that both he and I have used, and there's always some I guess some negative concern about building codes that are getting tighter and tighter and so
Right,
forth.
right.
But the thing that strikes me is there anybody that is making the effort to work with builders or builder groups or both to keep builders tuned in to what's going on in this area, and even more importantly, turn them from being somewhat complainers about this stuff into advocates, because that's in many cases where the rubber's going to meet the road. When somebody wants to do something, they talk to a contractor, and some are going to be, oh, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do the other thing, blah, 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 rather than, promoting the desirability of meeting these stretch codes and why they're there. What we're as citizens trying to do. So
Well, I think, there is some work going on, but it's all gets down to the details. There are workshops and training that have been developed that are specifically focused on both building inspectors and general contractors. And then you just got to get people to sign up for them. So for example, there was some material on this that I sent to Justin Post, and I think I sent it to most of the other building inspectors in the Outer Cape. This was a while ago. And it was very good training and would have been good exposure for them. I don't think any of them, they just didn't sign up for it. So it's just, there's a lot of shoe leather work to make these things happen. But there is a lot of good information about there. They're very good. Again, the science is very good. There's live examples of these net zero homes all over the country. There are a number of nonprofits nationally who have developed very, very good materials. And so it's an example. If we decided to take this on as a project, I'm not saying we should, but if we decided we were, then there is a lot of good material. We wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of good material. And then we could simply be the conduit and the promoter of this material, both to pave the way for supporting a net zero stretch code and also just net zero construction itself.
So David, you brought up a point that jogged my memory. About a year ago, maybe two, my wife comes home from the library and said there was a meeting at the library which the Energy Committee was sponsoring for all the local contractors. Now, was that Ace Solar agreed as part of the deal to put on a course for the local electricians?
Yes, no, that was part of the mandate of the state grant we got. The state said you must supply specialized training to the electrical inspectors of the towns. And then ACE, I think, did that.
So that went over very well because all the electrical guys didn't have to go to Boston or Hyannis. They could go to Wellfleet. And it was extremely popular with the local people. Now, is there something along that line where they have to take the training anyway that we could work in this net zero and find a way to get a trainer locally and get all the local builders happy that, we're helping them not drive to Boston and not drive to Hyannis?
Well, and if you get the builders and the building inspectors together in the same room, it could be really useful too. At least they all hear the same stuff. And then if they have a lot of questions, they can tussle it out with the presenter who's supposed to know about this more than we do.
Yes. Yeah.
To answer GB's question, when this came up when we were doing the Green Communities Act, the complaint was, I think the contractors complain as much about the fact that the stretch code is a moving target and it's going to change in 2 years or 3 years. It's uncertain as to how it's going to play out, except they're going to have to change periodically forever. The stretch code aiming toward net zero, on the other hand, is all, I don't say it's an end point, but it's a like, okay,
Yeah,
that's a goal to come to. That means that the stretch code won't be an upgrade. It's going to be, whoa, we're aiming at getting this down. So there's a raised indetra for them to buy in if they know there's an end point that is regional in concept, so that no one town contractors are being affected. I mean,
that's right. And there will be changes in the technology, of course, and the way to achieve net zero. But if the standards are clearly laid out, you're right, Chuck. I think that should be appealing to them, instead of, because there's only been one stretch code, and this is a second one. It's not like there's been 10. You know?
Right, but they've been proposed for so long that it sounds like it's going to keep going on forever. You know,
Right.
But
we're just
remember,
leading
the
you
old
on, then we'll
stretch,
give you another. Yeah.
the old stretch code becomes the law. So every 3 years, in theory, the building
There's a
code
new
changes
stretch code.
anyway. All they're doing is being 3 years ahead, or 1.5 years ahead on average.
This was a really discussed topic back when the town decided to go with the green, become a green community. And we talked a lot about that. Another thing, though, it made the historical commission worked with a whole bunch of the local builders. They worked with Justin, the building inspector, for people. They did like a workshop for people, trying to do community preservation in older homes and so forth. But that kind of a concept of, working with the developers, working with the building inspector, I think, to sort of explore the net zero, because I anticipate most of the builders are going to be antagonistic.
Right, for sure. They will be, yeah. And it's got to be dealt with, and I think it's doable.
But we went through this whole thing, when what's his name was our chair, the architect,
Marcus.
Marcus, yeah.
Yeah, the thing about it, there were a couple of really big objections. One was the cost to the homeowner would be higher. Therefore, the builders were concerned that they wouldn't have the business because the builders wouldn't be interested in doing projects because it costs more. The other thing was that there was an inspector that was called for in the Green Communities Act, and there was a cost, I believe, to the builder as well as to the homeowner, and if I recall correctly, too, at the time that it first came up, there weren't very many of these inspectors, and they were talking about an inspector having to come down from Boston and the additional costs of that, and holding up projects and things of that nature. Those were some of the objections at that time. If indeed a resource could be made available, and I'm sure there must be some out there, about building net zero and the cost savings over time, and making it simple, for people to understand what the options are that are in, both from the homeowner's point of view as well as from the builder's point of view, that might be helpful.
And
all these things this is new stuff, and it's getting to be a little more normalized already. So I agree with you completely, Lily. But when we did the renovation of this building I'm sitting in, of course, we went with the stretch code, the regular stretch code that the town adopted. And there was it's called a HERS inspection, H-E-R-S, I forget what it stands for.
Right.
And it was easy to get the person out here. The builder did not have to pay. I paid, but it was, I think, maybe $150 And so it did not slow the project down, and it didn't cost the builder anything. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, so that information as well as, you know, what materials and what the payback is, the payback time is, and the benefits of it. I mean,
Right.
if both the builders understand that as well as the homeowner, that could be a helpful resource.
right.
One of the things
The,
we have
the
here in
bottom
town,
line is, though, that when you build to net zero, it may cost a little more. The builder's going to have to do a little bit more work. The builder's going to have to make a little more profit on his little more work. And it's offset, more than offset, by not paying Saudi Arabia for home heating oil.
Right.
All right?
Yeah, I mean,
So-
there's some very good
It
information.
transfers costs from foreign oil to local labor, which is exactly what we want to happen.
Right.
Well, I mean, I think that also too, I mean, for you and I, when you take a look at a spreadsheet even, just, or a graphic, and you see, you know, it may cost you a little bit more money now, but you see over maybe 5-10 years, what the cost savings are going to be. I mean, I think that's very attractive to people. I mean, I think
Right.
it could be.
we have houses here in town that are net zero.
Right.
And most of the owners of those would love, if the committee, like I don't know what you do in the current environment, but if you had like house tours of
Yeah.
people with net zero homes, most of these
Right.
owners get so excited explaining to you what they've done, all the technology.
Yeah.
You know, maybe a virtual house tours could be put on the website too. I mean, the homeowner could do it with their cell phone, for goodness sakes, and talk about it. You know,
I thought the question was, what role could we play in facilitating this whole thing?
No, that is the question.
yeah. Well, resources and maybe a virtual house tours. I mean, maybe.
Well,
Or setting up a course.
But
that
I think, yeah, I think the point I was trying to make is, you know, not only what we can do to facilitate all this, but how can we turn, you know, the builders and the contractors into advocates? In other words, it's nice to be able to tell the person's doing the building, well, here's a net zero house, and they'd love to tell you all about it and so forth. But I think it'd be even better if, you know, the builders can say, okay, you've got to understand, this might cost a little more, this might cost a little more, but here's the net benefit to you over time, so that you know, everybody is on the same page in terms of advocating this, not getting some people saying, you know, this and complaining about it, and other people trying to advocate for it and leaving the person that wants to do the building scratching their head and saying, I don't know what the right thing to do is.
So,
By the
so
way,
in any case, this is another project that we could take on. We can't solve this whole problem right now in the call, I would
Right.
say. But
Right.
when I send you the notes from the phone call with Heather, it will include, I also will try to pull out of that some possible projects we take on. This could be one of them. And then we're going to have to really decide what our bandwidth is, how much we can actually take on.
You know, David, I'm glad that you're going to send that on, because I only wrote down 7 things, and you said there were.
All right.
By the way, hers is home energy rating system, and I
Right.
know I'm in Newton. I know in Newton that's been required on new buildings here for quite some time.
Right.
Yeah, because they adopted the stretch code, which requires it now.
Right.
So, you did it the same time we did when it became part of the stretch code 4 or 5 years ago. And even for towns that don't, when the next stretch code comes out, hers will be a requirement for all the other towns.
Right.
It'll be a requirement for everyone. Okay, is there anything else? It's getting a little late.
You know, just
Yes.
I don't know if there's anything for joint actions with Turo, discussion of 5-year energy plan, and committee liaison. Those are three topics that are on the agenda, but we haven't discussed them.
Right. Well, we talked a little bit about committee liaison, but is there anyone who has done something with other committees that
Oh.
wants to talk about?
Okay.
No. So any other new or old business?
Dick, I guess it's old business. I just want to know or be verified that attending this Zoom conference or Zoom meeting with the Energy Committee, I do not usually have to submit the password or the name of the meeting because you're doing it from your end. Is that right?
There are several options. This meeting was set up without a password.
Okay.
But even with a password, when I send out a link, if you click on the link, the password's embedded in the link.
Now, does that link change? Because I've made a copy of that. For me to go back to my emails from a month ago gets a little bit hairy, and that's why I was taking 3 minutes before I connected with you. And then it seemed to happen automatically. I've made a copy of the last one.
I'll try to use the same meeting ID. It has no password.
Okay, if you do
It's
that, then
it takes a little
I have
effort,
it.
but you
and I
can
know-
always go to the town website, find the agenda, and it's in the town website announcement.
Okay, that makes
Right.
sense.
Also,
The link is always part of it. But I will also
The
send out a
agenda.
meeting ID for people who use the app and don't use the link.
also along that line, Zoom has sent out a notice, just want to make sure everybody got it, that they're upgrading their encryption. And if you have to upgrade to Zoom 5.0 by the end of the month in order for that to work. I think they also said if you don't do that, the first time you go to a meeting after the upgrade is in full effect, it'll do an automatic download. But I'm just pointing out you can do it in advance, and then you don't have to worry about it.
Well, they bug you enough, and we all do enough Zoom meetings that we probably have already done it. I know I have, and I didn't notice any. It took another 30 seconds, and then after that, it's the same old, same old.
Okay.
Okay, is there anyone else who wants to bring up some new business or old business? Okay, I will try to keep this meeting ID. If not, it will always be in the email I send out. Okay?
And presumably we'll be in with the agenda that we get from Lily as well, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. And if I know that, that's always current enough that I'm not digging back too far. So that would be
Yeah.
helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Chuck, that's how I got in tonight, through Lily's send out.
Okay, well, I hadn't gone down. I read the minutes part, but I hadn't gone to the bottom of the agenda, so I see it now. So I've got it
Okay.
saved away. Good to see everybody.
So I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second
I
that.
move that we adjourn.
All
So
in
wait a
favor?
minute. When is the next meeting?
Oh, yes,
Good point.
very good point. We should decide that. Let's do it in June. We're having so much fun. Okay, let me get up a calendar. So in June, the third Monday is the 15th. Does that sound?
Yeah, that's when we vote, supposedly. Do we still want to do it that day?
You mean it's election day?
It is, yeah.
Well, the polls will be over by 7.
They're usually 8, yeah. But
Well,
I don't care. I mean, 7 would be fine with me. That would be fine.
How are we going to be able to vote this year? How's it going to work?
nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
And along with the fact that we don't even know if the election will be held on that day.
Right, exactly. Yeah, well, that would be fine. Monday, the 15th at 7 p.m.
Okay?
Okay.
All right,
So-
sounds good.
Okay, so, my motion still stands.
Right. We'll
No.
take a vote.
Check.
All in favor?
All
Aye.
right.
All opposed? The motion carries.
Be safe, everyone.
Yeah, you too. Have a safe
You.
one.
Good to
Bye-bye.
see everybody.
Healthy.
Bye-bye.
Night, everybody.
Night.
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 Stay safe.